Ever since the dawn of time, humanity has had to ask one imperative question. Is game good or no good? Gaming has never been known for being an especially cheap hobby, with just buying a system running you out of at least a couple $100, and on top of that, having to generally pay anywhere from $40 to now even $70 for titles from notable series, along with a bit more money possibly going to accessories such as additional controllers. You can see how the costs begin to pile up pretty quickly. That's why it's so important for gamers to make sure they're getting their money's worth before making that investment. This is where the concept of game reviews enters the picture. Game reviews have likely existed in some capacity ever since the beginning of gaming. There was probably some guy out there giving his opinion on Pong. Before the rise of the internet though, instead of it being some article or video like is the standard today, it was probably bringing your opinion on the latest release up in a conversation. As gaming started to become more mainstream though, along with the internet, the two went together like peanut butter and jelly, and discussion about the quality of games largely shifted online. And if you were lucky, sometimes even TV, with one of the most notable series discussing gaming being X-Play on G4. Rest in peace, again. There was also the series of legend, Blight's Fantasy, or more commonly known today as Gaming in the Clan Years, which had iconic lines such as,
in answer to Lara's giant earrings, however, we have a challenge to Eidos. In Tomb Raider 3, create a storyline in which Lara gets breast cancer. Imagine the drama.
Mostly though, discussion about how good a game was would take place on internet forums. Gaming continued to grow in interest though, enough to the point where it's economically viable for there to be journalism websites mostly dedicated to gaming, although they often do other stuff as well. Some of the first websites to come to mind when discussing games journalism are sites like IGN, Kotaku, GameSpot, and there are many more out there. Granted, most of them are largely treated as jokes for one reason or another, but that's a discussion for another time. These sites became the go-to places for hearing about the latest new releases and whether they were good or not. The critics' opinions would be quantified with the review score, often judged on a scale of 1 to 10, but there are some out there that use the 1 to 5 stars rating, and some cases of using a 1 to 100 rating, instead of just using the number 9.5 to say a game's a 95 out of 100. Although this video is discussing why I dislike review scores and believe they should fully die out, it's not like there's no positives with review scores. Giving a game a score is the most direct way to convey one's recommendation of something, and that goes for not just games, but a lot of other similar mediums, such as movies, TV shows, books, and more. However, I believe the idea of review scores to be largely dated for the current landscape of the gaming community, and will rather see the industry ditch the idea of scores for games altogether, and in this video, I'll explain why. If you enjoy this video and want to see more like this, consider liking and subscribing. Now let's talk about what I dislike about review scores. I have 3 major problems with review scores as they exist today. The first of which being that I feel like the gaming community has many differing interpretations of the 1 to 10 scale. When your average person talks about a 1 to 10 scale to judge something, 5 is often considered the middle of the pack. There's just about as much good as there is bad, and it all balances out to be an okay experience. When it comes to games, however, it feels like the curve of judgment for a game is a bit different, with the mark for an okay game instead being at around a 7 out of 10. The 1 to 10 point scale reflects the school grading system a lot more in the community's eyes, and I feel like it makes people judge scores lower than 9 way too harshly. For example, recently, Stellar Blade got a 7 out of 10, which by IGN's own measure indicates good. The gaming community, and by that I mostly mean diehard Sony fanboys, along with touch-starved weirdos, were acting like it was the end of the world that this game got a 7 from IGN, and honestly, there are even some cases of people getting mad at 8s. If an 8 isn't even good enough to satisfy some of these people, then I think it's a sign that scores in their current form aren't able to do their job at conveying the quality of a game without being turned into a weapon by console war idiots. I think moments like this are why it's largely unheard of for games from established series or AAA games to get anything lower than a 7 or 8, because there will be torches and pitchforks coming straight at the headquarters of these websites because they dare criticize the latest Call of Duty or Mario game. Adding to that, my second problem with the review score system is that games from already established series or AAA games are inherently at an advantage compared to the smaller games in terms of scores. To illustrate my point, we're going to play a little game that I call Guess Which Game Has the Higher Review Score. These are going to be 2 separate games reviewed by IGN. I'll put up 3 quotes regarding each game, but I won't directly tell you what game it is until I reveal the scores. Sounds good? Okay, let's go. For game 1, the first quote: "The problem is that this game does just enough to reach an HD threshold, and then it stops." The second quote: "It doesn't help that some levels, like a spectacular piece focusing on Van Gogh's Starry Night, are so stunning, you start to wonder why that same creativity wasn't applied to the entire product." And the last quote: "By the time this game really starts to do interesting things, it's over." Now, for the second game, the first quote is: is a clever idea and helps show how this game embraces both genre traditions and new ideas to create one of the best JRPGs of recent years. For the second quote, the character art is simple and striking, but the gorgeous hand-painted backdrops teem with detail and color. And finally, it's a substantial adventure that proves the JRPG remains alive and kicking. So, which game do you think scored higher? Well, since subversion of expectations is a common tactic, I think that in spite of the language I used for both game reviews, you know by now that Game 1 scored higher, and some of you probably know what game it even is. But yes, Game 1 scored a 9.1 on IGN, while Game 2 was given an 8.6. Those games were New Super Mario Bros. U and Bravely Default respectively. And yes, while some will point out that the quotes from the NSMBU review are indeed cherry-picked to point out its most negative aspects, that last quote alone kinda contradicts a lot of other language used in the review that praises the game. But as you know, the point I wanted to get across here was that the major series and higher budget games are often an advantage when it comes to review scores. Because let's be real, you can enjoy a game like Tetris all you want, but are you really gonna go and rate higher on a 1 to 10 scale than something like Skyrim? Of course, there are exceptions to the rule, most notably indie games that blow up in popularity, but that doesn't mean the rule doesn't exist. My third and most massive issue with game scores is that the score itself is often the only thing that people take away from the review. I kinda alluded to this when I passed 2 points, but the unintended side effect of giving a game a review score is that a lot of the language gets tossed to the side in favor of looking at the number at the end of the review. While a review score is the easiest way to convey the quality of a game, it's not the full story. What the rest of the review does that the review score itself can is present more in-depth opinions of the reviewer, while directly talking about the game itself. People also seem to forget that the language of the review itself is what is used to determine that final review score, and honestly, a lot of these websites play into that. I mean, look at what IGN does on Twitter. When a game drops, they post an image of the game they're talking about, make the score they give it massive, the biggest and most eye-catching thing in the image, and below it put a small blurb of the reviewer's verdict on the game that often does very little in the way of talking about direct gameplay. I'm not saying gamers have no attention span. Oh wait, that's exactly what I'm saying. Without the review score, gamers will have to put much more thought and actually pay attention to what the critic is saying about the game to formulate their own opinion on where it's worth the investment or not. Anyways, that's all I have to say about the review scores themselves. In terms of an alternative, I really liked when IGN would put the pros and cons of each game next to the review score. I think that flashing that instead of a review score at the end of the video, while having the reviewer reiterate their general thoughts on the game in question, should be the standard for game reviews in the future. But with that out of the way, let me know your thoughts on the topic in the comments. Thanks for watching.